Well, I'm Charlie Beer. I'm an undergraduate marketing major, BIA minor, and for my next session for the day, I went to the quest to capture carbon and bend the curve. This was led by Ralph Keeling, who was a climate scientist at the University of UC San Diego, Matthew Long, who was the CEO and co-founder of Seaworthy, Janice Overbeck, who was a filmmaker that specializes in the activism side of filmmaking, and then Mina Zarabian, who is the CEO and co-founder of Carbonova. Um, so they were I ended up being a little bit late to this because it overlapped with my last session, and I wanted to make sure I got into four before I took off for the flight, or my flight, because I had to leave in the middle of the day yesterday. Um, but when I got there, the first thing they were really talking about was how we have to separate the idea of just reducing our carbon impact with actually removing carbon from the atmosphere. Even if tomorrow we decided to stop producing anything with carbon in it, we banned all fossil fuels, cars weren't allowed to run unless they were electric all across the board. If we stopped it, we would still be past the point of no return with the amount of carbon that's in our atmosphere. And we obviously have like the ocean and plants that are taking in CO2, but at the levels we've already produced, unless we develop new ways to actually remove that carbon from the atmosphere, we're really stuck exactly where we've been, even if we were to remove fossil fuels, which is something that really shocked me because a lot of the time all we discuss, at least in a business sense, for what we need to do with the problems that are happening with our climate is that we need to stop producing carbon, but that's just not the case anymore. We need to go so far beyond that. And it's really just a problem that we need to solve. Um, they were talking about how there's been, especially since COVID, when we kind of like full frontal had to sit down and face all those problems in our own houses, that there's been a huge increase in both public and private sectors that are trying to combat the crisis we're facing. But we don't like it's not something that's just going to happen because those companies are putting money in it. This has to be an across the board, everyone around the world working together. And again, like as much as I personally, as an individual, can choose better options for recycled materials and making sure that I'm not personally contributing more to the carbon problem we're facing, we need to have people voting and demanding changes at the highest scales if we really want this to actually make any meaningful impact on stuff. Everyone can make their own small differences, but coming together is where we'll actually be able to take that first step to solving a problem rather than just slowing it down a little bit. And yeah, there's no single entity on this planet that, if they put all their resources into it, could solve climate change on their own. This is something we need all the governments of the world. We need all the major companies that exist to put time and effort into solving this problem if we want any large scale, meaningful change to come from it, because it is not something that is just going to one day stop or flip or change. It's going to be a slow, winding process to actually bring these carbon levels down and make changes for our world. Um, they also were talking about how, with our current technology, it's really hard. Like, we don't have everything we need right now to just set up what would stop the problem and start reversing it. We need so many different diverse technologies that work together and are on all different levels of the carbon spectrum. We need to find ways that we are going to be able to produce energy without creating more carbon. We need to find ways to reduce the carbon that's already being emitted by stuff that we can't necessarily change over to electric power or something. And then on top of that, we need to make sure that we're actually doing stuff to remove the carbon that exists. We can't just be okay with satiating the problem slowly. Um, the problem that they were talking about with a lot of, especially in the private sector, obviously governments have an obligation to help with this because they're for the people, by the people, they're supposed to be helping us. And this is something that's affecting everyone. So it's kind of like already put onto the governments. But the problem in the private sector is to actually make these meaningful changes across your supply lines, production levels, everything. It takes so much money to reset what you've already set up, and you won't be receiving any real reward for it. Like, unless the governments are going to start giving obscene carbon taxes and stuff like that, where you're getting significant amounts of money back for making these changes, then there's no way that companies are going to be able to justify fully reversing what they've built over the last 10, 20, 100 years, which are basically all focused around the fossil fuel productions we were using at that time. And we need something that can really change it. The solution they kind of talked about a bit went a bit over my head because I'm not very familiar on the science side, more just on the what's happening side of it. But they, like half of the carbon that we produce during 1 year, I forget how much it was. It was gigatons or some crazy number that I couldn't even really fathom at the time because I hadn't really heard that large of a supply of something. But what I did learn was that almost half of that carbon that is being released is being absorbed back into the land and the sea, like the plants, the trees absorbing CO2, releasing oxygen, the ocean absorbing CO2, releasing oxygen. Like that stuff is happening on a wide scale. It's not something that is like a problem for us. It is being there, but the one way they thought we could start making that even better is to do with ocean alkalinity. And if we were able to increase the alkalinity of the ocean, it would allow much higher levels of carbon production to be, or carbon reduction to be taking place. Um, but it's like one of those things that's that next level of tech that we need to discover and build and make it so it can be widespread used in the ocean while also not harming the plant life, harming the animals, harming people that are swimming in oceans. We have to make sure it's all safe. And so that's that next step of technology they kind of discussed as like what will be the solution once we can figure out how to do it. And I thought it was really cool because as much as I've heard how to reduce carbon levels, I haven't really heard anything about actually reversing it. And this was really cool technology to hear about. Thank you.